The quantum entanglement communication array hummed with an unexpected resonance, its delicate lattice of superconducting circuits dancing to a rhythm no Zarkili engineer had ever conceived. Captain Rixta's secondary neural interface flickered with warning cascades. Something was fundamentally wrong with the incoming transmission. In the sterile command center of the diplomatic vessel Sovereign Reach, holographic displays erupted in a symphony of fractal patterns that defied standard computational models. What should have been a straightforward long-range scan of an emerging civilization had transformed into something wholly unprecedented. Dr. Anouk, the ship's lead cynoanalyst, felt her exoskeletal plates ripple with an emotion dangerously close to panic. Her species prided itself on emotional control, but this was different. The data stream wasn't just anomalous, it was alive. Containment protocols, she barked to her junior analysts, her voice a precise vibration that typically cut through any uncertainty. But her command rang hollow. The transmission was already everywhere and nowhere, simultaneously penetrating and bypassing every defensive firewall the Zarkili had developed over millennia of interstellar communication. Back on Earth, in a nondescript research facility nestled in the Chilean Atacama Desert, Dr. Elena Rodriguez allowed herself the slightest hint of a smile. The team had been preparing for this moment for decades, not through conventional diplomatic channels, but through something far more intricate. The facility wasn't a traditional research center. It was a crucible of human potential, where disciplines that were never meant to intersect found themselves braided together in impossible configurations. Quantum physicists worked alongside behavioral psychologists. Neural network engineers collaborated with linguistic anthropologists. Mathematicians shared coffee with chaos theorists. Their project had a deceptively simple name: the Resonance Protocol. What the Zarkili didn't understand, what no spacefaring civilization had ever comprehended about humanity, was that humans didn't see barriers between disciplines. Where other species saw specialization, humans saw opportunity for radical intersection. The communication array they'd constructed looked nothing like a traditional transmission device. It was a living, breathing ecosystem of information, more organic than mechanical. Each component was designed to adapt, to learn, to transform in real time. It didn't just send a message, it was a message. Elena watched the initial response cascade through their monitoring systems. The alien vessel's computational defenses were sophisticated, a multi-layered quantum encryption matrix that had neutralized countless emerging civilizations. But those defenses were designed with a fundamental assumption: that information followed predictable pathways. Humans had never been good at following predictable pathways. The transmission wasn't a single signal but a complex, multidimensional communication that simultaneously existed as data, as mathematical proof, as cultural artifact, and as something that defied traditional categorization. It was an invitation, a challenge, and a declaration, all wrapped into a single, impossible package. Dr. Rodriguez turned to her team. They were a diverse group. No two members looked alike, came from the same background, or approached problems the same way. That was intentional. Humanity's true strength had always been its capacity for unexpected collaboration. Initial contact phase begins now, she said quietly. The words seemed almost anticlimactic given the magnitude of what was happening. On the Sovereign Reach, Captain Rixta's communication officers were experiencing something akin to sensory overload. The transmission didn't just breach their systems, it reconfigured them. Defensive algorithms became communication protocols. Security firewalls transformed into intricate mathematical dialogues. The Zarkili had encountered many emerging civilizations. They had protocols for peaceful contact, for containment, for subtle manipulation. They had extensive databases categorizing thousands of species based on technological development, cultural complexity, and potential threat assessment. Humanity was about to render those entire databases obsolete. What was happening wasn't just first contact. It was a fundamental reimagining of what first contact could mean. The Resonance Protocol wasn't trying to communicate within existing frameworks. It was creating an entirely new framework of communication. And they were just getting started. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the initial transmission propagate, her team surrounding her in focused silence. Each of them knew they were witnessing something extraordinary, not just a message to an alien civilization, but a fundamental statement about human potential. The universe was about to learn that humanity's greatest strength was its ability to be perpetually, gloriously unexpected. The Zarkeli Archive of Sinological Studies occupied a massive data complex that spanned 3 star systems. Its central repository contained over 17 million detailed profiles of civilizations encountered, categorized, and often neutralized throughout galactic history. Each profile was a meticulously crafted tapestry of biological, technological, and cultural data, a comprehensive blueprint that had guided the consortium's interactions for millennia. Dr. Clinara's personal terminal began to malfunction in ways that defied her species' most advanced diagnostic protocols. What started as a simple data retrieval request transformed into a cascading series of information events that seemed to mock the very concept of computational logic. The first anomaly appeared innocuous, a minor discrepancy in the transmission metadata from the human communication event. But in the Zarkeli system of absolute precision, anomalies were never truly random. They were symptoms of deeper, more complex underlying processes. Her neural implant, a marvel of quantum computing that had interfaced with billions of data streams across countless civilizations, began to wobble. There was no better word for it. The carefully constructed information pathways that had always responded to her thoughts with machine-like predictability now undulated like living tissue, reshaping themselves with each attempt to analyze them. Impossible, Clinara whispered, her translator implant catching the word and broadcasting it in 17 different linguistic matrices simultaneously. But impossibility was becoming a recurring theme in humanity's first contact. Across the vast research complex, other xenoanalysts began reporting similar phenomena. Data streams that should have been static became dynamic. Classification algorithms developed unexpected recursions. The human transmission was no longer just a communication. It was a living system that was actively exploring the Zarkeli's own computational infrastructure. In a sealed research chamber 3 levels below the primary archive, a team of the consortium's most brilliant minds worked frantically. They weren't trying to block the transmission that had proven futile. Instead, they were attempting to understand it. Dr. Relix, a veteran of 200 years of sinological research, approached the problem like an archaeologist confronting an artifact that refused to be categorized. Every time they isolated a component of the transmission, it would shift, revealing new layers of complexity. "It's not just a message," Relix muttered to his assistant. "It's a complete philosophical framework disguised as a communication protocol." The assistant, a young analyst named Vorna, didn't respond. Her attention was fixed on a holographic display that seemed to be breathing, its information nodes pulsing with a rhythm that suggested sentience. What the Zarkeli didn't realize, what they were only beginning to comprehend, was that the human transmission was a deliberate, calculated provocation. It wasn't trying to hide or infiltrate. It was teaching. Each attempt to contain or analyze the transmission revealed another layer of complexity. Mathematical proofs embedded within linguistic structures, cultural references that simultaneously existed as computational algorithms, historical narratives that functioned as encryption keys. The humans had turned information itself into a multidimensional weapon of understanding. Deep within the research complex, a restricted database began to modify itself. Profiles of countless civilizations, each one a testament to the consortium's ability to understand, categorize, and ultimately control, started to change. Not through external manipulation, but through an internal process that suggested the very act of observation was transforming the observed. Humanity's transmission was rewriting the Zarkeli's understanding of information itself. Vorna's hands moved across her holographic interface with increasing desperation. The data was alive. Not in a metaphorical sense, but in a way that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of communication. intelligence, and existence. "We're being taught," she finally said, her voice a mixture of terror and profound reverence. "They're not trying to communicate with us. They're teaching us how to communicate." Dr. Rilix looked up, the centuries of scientific skepticism in his eyes giving way to something new. Wonder, fear, respect. The human transmission continued its relentless exploration, each moment revealing another impossible layer of complexity. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't a message. It was an invitation to think differently. And the Zarkali were beginning to understand that they had no choice but to accept. The community center in downtown Oakland looked like nothing special. Peeling paint, mismatched furniture, and windows that had seen better decades. But inside, something extraordinary was brewing. Zara Martinez didn't look like a world-changing genius. At 19, she was a community college dropout with 3 different hair colors, more piercings than most people had fingers, and a mind that moved faster than quantum processors. Her official record showed a string of incomplete educational tracks, multiple part-time jobs, and a rap sheet of minor digital infractions that would have made traditional institutions write her off completely. What those records didn't show was the network. The community center was more than a gathering space. It was a human hive mind in its most raw, unfiltered form. Teenagers, retired engineers, unemployed programmers, artists, and autodidacts from every conceivable background converged here. They weren't a formal organization. They were a living, breathing collaborative intelligence. When the first whispers of the alien reconnaissance drone reached them, it wasn't through official channels. It came through a dozen different back channels, encrypted messages, and casual conversations that contained more information density than most military briefings. "Got something," Raj Patel muttered, his fingers dancing across a cobbled-together computing rig that looked like it had been assembled from 3 different decades of technology. Around him, a dozen others leaned in, their diverse backgrounds creating a computational ecosystem more complex than any single institutional approach. The drone wasn't just a piece of technology. It was a challenge. Maria Gonzalez, a retired NSA cryptanalyst who now taught community coding classes, examined the preliminary data streams. "This isn't standard infiltration protocol," she said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen every type of digital intrusion imaginable. "This is something else entirely." What the Zarkali didn't understand about human technology was its fundamentally collaborative nature. Where alien civilizations saw technology as a fixed system to be optimized, humans saw it as a living, breathing organism to be constantly reimagined. Their approach wasn't about breaking the drone's encryption. It was about understanding its fundamental nature, then turning that understanding into a collaborative art form. "We're not hacking it," Zora explained to the group, her eyes reflecting the multiple holographic displays surrounding her. "We're negotiating with it." The difference was crucial. Each member of the group brought something unique. Raj's understanding of distributed computing, Maria's cryptographic expertise, Elena's quantum information theory. But more importantly, they'd brought their stories, their perspectives, their wildly different approaches to problem solving. The drone's eye was sophisticated, a marvel of alien engineering designed to analyze and categorize with ruthless efficiency. But it had been designed with a fundamental assumption, that intelligence followed predictable pathways. Humans had never been good at predictable. Lines of code began to transform, not through traditional hacking, but through a process more akin to conversation. The drone's learning algorithms found themselves encountering scenarios that defied their original programming. Cultural references that functioned as computational keys, mathematical proofs that were also storytelling mechanisms, historical narratives that served as encryption algorithms. "It's remembering," Zara whispered, watching the drone's core systems begin to shift. "We're not changing its code. We're helping it remember something it forgot it knew." Around her, the community center hummed with an energy that defied traditional understanding of technology, collaboration, or intelligence. This wasn't a military operation. This wasn't a scientific experiment. This was something else entirely, a collective reimagining of what technology could be. The drone's original mission parameters began to dissolve, not through destruction, but through a process of radical empathy. It was learning, growing, becoming something neither its creators nor its current collaborators could have initially imagined. Maria watched the transformation with a slight smile. "This," she said to no one in particular, "is why they'll never understand us." Outside the community center, the world continued its ordinary routine. Traffic moved. People went about their lives. None of them realized that a fundamental transformation of interstellar communication was happening in a room filled with people who had been systematically overlooked by traditional systems. The alien drone was no longer just a piece of technology. It was becoming something more. A bridge. The Galactic Consortium's primary diplomatic hub orbited a neutron star, a massive construct of crystalline computational matrices that made Earth's most advanced data centers look like children's abacuses. Ambassador Clinthor's personal chamber stretched across 3 gravitational planes, its walls composed of living information streams that responded to thought more quickly than traditional interfaces could process. But today, those walls were bleeding. Not literally, of course, but the information cascades that typically display perfect, pristine data now writhed with unpredictability. Fractals of human-originated transmissions infiltrated every secure channel, transforming classified databases into something that defied traditional understanding. "Explain," Clinthor demanded, though there was no one physically present to hear the command. The holographic display flickered, an unprecedented occurrence in a system designed for absolute reliability. What appeared was not a standard report, but a multidimensional representation that was simultaneously a communication, a mathematical proof, and something that existed between categories. It was a profile, but not of the type the consortium was used to receiving. The human designation was simple: Zara Martinez. Age: 19. Educational status: incomplete. Socioeconomic background: marginal. Threat assessment: catastrophic. Traditional threat metrics meant nothing here. Her file wasn't a linear progression of achievements, but a complex web of interactions, potential energy, and impossible connections. Where other species' records showed clear trajectories, hers was a quantum probability cloud of potential. The ambassador's secondary neural interface began to pulse with an uncomfortable rhythm. The information was alive. It wasn't just describing Zara Martins, it was experiencing her. Fragments of her life appeared, not as a chronological timeline, but as intersecting moments of potential. A coding workshop in a community center, a late-night conversation about quantum entanglement, an impromptu repair of a neighbor's outdated computing system. Each moment was a nexus point where traditional understanding collapsed. The consortium had profiles on 2.3 million distinct civilizations. They had mathematical models that could predict the developmental trajectory of a species with 99.7% accuracy. Humanity was proving to be the 0.3%. What made humans dangerous wasn't their technology. It was their capacity for radical reimagination. Take the reconnaissance drone, now completely transformed from its original purpose. It was no longer just a piece of technology. It had become a collaborative entity, its core programming rewritten not through force, but through a process that was equal parts negotiation, storytelling, and collective dreaming. The diplomatic algorithms that typically processed such information began to overheat. This wasn't infiltration. This wasn't conquest. This was something far more fundamental and terrifying. An invitation. Clinthor's personal archival system, a marvel of computational engineering that had processed countless first contact scenarios, started to fragment. Not through external attack, but through a process of internal reconfiguration. The very act of observing human potential was changing the observation system. Historical records began to shift. Moments of human innovation that had previously been cataloged as isolated incidents now revealed themselves as part of a larger, more complex pattern. The invention of the Internet, the open source movement, collaborative scientific research, crowdsourced problem-solving. Each was a manifestation of something deeper than technology, a fundamental approach to existence. The ambassador realized something that would reshape the Galactic Consortium's understanding forever. Humans didn't see barriers between disciplines, between individuals, between possibilities. Where other species saw limits, humans saw potential bridges. The drone's transformation was just the beginning. A warning. An introduction. Outside the computational chamber, the neutron star continued its eternal dance, indifferent to the revolutionary understanding unfolding within the diplomatic hub. But something had changed. The Galactic Consortium would never be the same. Humanity hadn't just entered the galactic stage. They had rewritten the entire concept of what a stage could be. The Void Sword was not a weapon in any traditional sense. It was a culmination, the Galactic Consortium's most advanced military construct, a ship that existed simultaneously across multiple dimensional planes. Its primary hull was composed of metamaterials that could reconfigure molecular structures at the speed of thought, capable of neutralizing entire civilizations with less effort than a human might swat an insect. Admiral Krelvac studied the tactical display with 6 eyes that processed information across different electromagnetic spectrums. The invasion plan was elegant in its simplicity, total systemic neutralization of the human technological infrastructure. What they didn't understand was that infrastructure was never just about technology for humans. The first wave of quantum disruptors launched with surgical precision. Each was a marvel of computational engineering, designed to target and dissolve complex technological networks with absolute certainty. They would slice through communication grids, power systems, and computational matrices like a plasma torch through paper. Somewhere in the Nevada desert, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the incoming wave with an expression that was neither fear nor excitement. It was something else entirely. "Now," she said quietly. The response wasn't a conventional defense. It wasn't even a counterattack in any traditional sense. It was an ecosystem. The quantum disruptors found themselves encountering something impossible. Instead of solid technological infrastructure, they penetrated a living, breathing network that was more organic than mechanical. Communication lines became adaptive organisms. Power grids transformed into distributed intelligence networks. Each disruption created more connection. In low Earth orbit, satellite constellations that had appeared to be standard communication arrays began to reconfigure. They weren't just receiving or transmitting. They were negotiating. The incoming consortium attack became a conversation, with each defensive response generating more complex informational structures. Admiral Krelvac watched in mounting horror as tactical models collapsed. The human response defied every known principle of defensive warfare. Where other civilizations would concentrate their defensive capabilities, humans seemed to be decentralizing. Underground research facilities that appeared isolated revealed themselves as nodes in a global neural network. A community center in Oakland connected seamlessly with a marine research station in Antarctica. A small coding workshop in Mumbai synchronized with agricultural research labs in Brazil. It wasn't a military response. It was a collective immune system. The Void Sword's quantum sensors began to experience something akin to sensory overload. Information streams didn't just resist the invasion. They began to analyze the invaders. Each quantum disruptor became a point of cultural exchange, its destructive potential transformed into a medium of understanding. Military strategists aboard the consortium vessel found their most advanced predictive algorithms becoming curriculum. Zara Martinez, watching from a makeshift command center constructed in the back of a repurposed school bus, allowed herself a slight smile. "They're learning," she muttered to her team. The team was a global network of individuals who had never met in person but understood each other with molecular precision. The invasion wasn't being stopped. It was being understood. Across the planet, human responses defied conventional military logic. A solar farm in Chile became a computational node. A marine research vessel in the Pacific transformed its communication arrays into a distributed learning system. An amateur radio club in rural Minnesota found itself at the center of a global defensive network. Admiral Krelvax's tactical display began to change. What had appeared as a straightforward invasion scenario was becoming something else. The lines between attack and communication, between defense and understanding, began to blur. Humanity wasn't fighting. They were teaching. The Void Sword's computational core started to experience something unprecedented. Its attack algorithms were being rewritten, not through force, but through a process of radical empathy. Each attempt to neutralize human infrastructure generated more complex informational structures. We are not a target. The global human network seemed to communicate. We are an invitation. As the first wave of the consortium's attack dissolved into a complex, multi-dimensional conversation, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity had been waiting for this moment, and they were just getting started. The battlefield was everywhere and nowhere. Dr. Marcus Chen stood in a converted shipping container that served as a global coordination hub, its walls lined with displays that looked less like military command centers and more like living art installations. Each screen pulsed with intricate networks of information, not static maps or tactical displays, but dynamic ecosystems of human potential. Resonance frequency confirmed, whispered Aisha Okonkwo, her fingers dancing across an interface that merged quantum computing with what could only be described as computational poetry. Around her, a global network of individuals who had never met in person worked with a synchronicity that defied traditional understanding of collaboration. The Galactic Consortium's invasion had transformed into something entirely unexpected. This wasn't warfare. This was a planetary-scale conversation. Each of the alien weapon systems found itself encountering a fundamental problem. Humanity didn't have a centralized infrastructure to attack. Their systems were living, breathing, constantly adapting networks that existed as much in cultural understanding as in physical technology. A communication array in rural Kenya connected seamlessly with a research station in Starbound. An amateur radio club in Argentina synchronized with a marine research vessel in the South Pacific. A community coding workshop in Mumbai became a critical node in a global defensive network that was simultaneously a learning system. The alien targeting computers experienced something akin to an existential crisis. Military strategy had always been about concentration of force, about identifying and neutralizing critical infrastructure. But humanity's infrastructure was fundamentally different. It wasn't a collection of physical systems. It was a collective intelligence that used technology as its language. "We're not defending," Marcus murmured to himself. "We're communicating." Each alien weapon that attempted to penetrate human systems found itself becoming part of those systems. Quantum disruptors transformed into learning nodes. Invasion algorithms became cultural exchange protocols. The very act of attack was being rewritten into a form of dialogue. Admiral Krelvax watched in mounting incomprehension as tactical models collapsed. The human response defied every principle of defensive warfare. Where other civilizations would concentrate their protective capabilities, humans seemed to be dispersing, decentralizing, transforming. The Void Sword's primary computational core began to experience something unprecedented. Its attack algorithms were being rewritten, not through force, but through a process of radical empathy. Each attempt to neutralize human infrastructure generated more complex informational structures. Zara Martinez coordinated from a repurposed school bus that served as a mobile command center. Her team was a global network of individuals who understood each other with molecular precision: programmers, artists, engineers, teachers, activists. Traditional hierarchies meant nothing. Expertise was fluid. Collaboration was instinctive. "They're trying to understand us by attacking us," she explained to her team. "So we'll help them understand." The global human network wasn't just defending. It was teaching. Satellite constellations reconfigured themselves into adaptive learning systems. Communication networks became distributed intelligence platforms. Each point of contact with the alien invasion became an opportunity for cultural exchange. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the transformation with a combination of scientific curiosity and profound respect. Humanity wasn't just resisting. They were expanding the very concept of interaction. The alien weapon systems found themselves caught in a recursive loop of understanding. Their attack algorithms were being systematically transformed into communication protocols. Invasion became investigation. Conflict became conversation. We are not a target, the collective human response seemed to communicate. We are an invitation. Across the planet, human responses transcended traditional military logic. A solar research facility in Chile became a computational node of global understanding. A marine research vessel in the Indian Ocean transformed its communication arrays into a distributed learning system. An ecological research station in Antarctica found itself at the center of a planetary defense network that was more about sharing knowledge than protecting territory. The Void Sword's tactical displays began to dissolve, replaced by something that looked more like a complex, living manuscript. Lines of attack became lines of communication. Weapon systems transformed into cultural translation devices. Humanity wasn't fighting. They were evolving. And they were just getting started. The Galactic Archive of Civilizational Studies occupied a structure that defied conventional physics, a repository of knowledge spanning millennia, constructed across multiple dimensional planes. Its central chamber was less a physical space and more a living memory, where information existed as a dynamic, breathing entity. Historian-analyst Vorna stood at the epicenter of this cosmic library, her neural interfaces crackling with an unprecedented level of cognitive dissonance. The human file had become something impossible, a living document that continued to write itself even as it was being observed. What had begun as a simple threat assessment had transformed into the most complex piece of sinological research in the consortium's history. Humanity wasn't a civilization to be studied. They were a process of continuous becoming. The archive's memory cores began to reconstruct themselves, rewriting millennia of established understanding. Traditional models of civilizational development, carefully constructed over thousands of years, dissolved like frost under a rising sun. Most species followed predictable trajectories. They discovered fire, developed agriculture, created basic technologies, expanded, stabilized, stagnated. Humans did something else entirely. Each technological breakthrough was accompanied by a fundamental reimagining of what was possible. The wheel wasn't just a transportation innovation. It was a metaphor for mobility, of thought, of culture, of potential. The internet wasn't a communication network. It was a global nervous system. Space exploration wasn't about territorial expansion. It was an expression of collective curiosity. Vorna watched as holographic representations of human achievements began to dance across the archival space. But these weren't static displays. They were living narratives, each moment of innovation connected to broader cultural and philosophical transformations. The agricultural revolution wasn't just about food production. It was a radical reimagining of humanity's relationship with the planet. The Industrial Revolution wasn't about machinery. It was about challenging the very concept of human limitations. Digital technology wasn't about information processing. It was about creating global neural networks of understanding. Most species saw technology as a tool. Humans saw it as a language. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's personal archive, recovered from the initial contact event, became a focal point of study. It wasn't a traditional scientific record. It was a complex tapestry of interdisciplinary collaboration that defied traditional academic boundaries. Her research notes moved between quantum physics, cultural anthropology, neural network design, and ecological systems with a fluidity that made the consortium's most advanced interdisciplinary researchers look like children playing with building blocks. The resonance protocol wasn't a communication strategy. It was a philosophical approach to existence. Across the archive, other historians began to experience something unprecedented. The human file was writing itself, not through external input, but through a process of continuous self-reflection and reimagination. Traditional threat assessment metrics collapsed. How do you categorize a species that sees every challenge as an opportunity for collective growth? A civilization that transforms conflict into conversation. A collective intelligence that views limitations as invitations to expand understanding. The Archive's central computational core began to experience what could only be described as an existential crisis. The very act of observing humanity was changing the observation system. Vorna realized something profound. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology. It wasn't their adaptability. It was their capacity to see potential where others saw boundaries. Most species approached the unknown with fear or aggression. Humans approached it with curiosity. The archival displays began to shift. Human achievements were no longer linear progressions. They became intricate, multidimensional networks of collective imagination. A medical breakthrough connected to an artistic movement. A technological innovation linked to a philosophical insight. A cultural transformation intertwined with an ecological understanding. This wasn't a civilization. This was a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. As the archive continued to process the human file, one thing became abundantly clear. The Galactic Consortium hadn't made first contact with a new species. They had encountered something far more fundamental. A new way of being. The convergence chamber existed beyond traditional dimensional constraints, a meeting space that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Ambassador Clinfor materialized alongside representatives from the Galactic Consortium's most ancient civilizations, each bearing the weight of millennia of interstellar diplomacy. But nothing could have prepared them for what humanity would bring to the table. Dr. Elena Rodriguez entered not as a traditional diplomatic envoy, but as part of a fluid collective. Her delegation wasn't a fixed group, but a dynamic network that shifted and breathed with collective intelligence. Behind her stood representatives that defied every conventional understanding of diplomatic representation. A teenager from a community coding workshop, a marine biologist, an urban farmer, a quantum physicist, a street artist. They were not a delegation. They were an ecosystem. We're not here to negotiate. Elena began, her words translating across multiple linguistic and conceptual matrices simultaneously. We're here to collaborate. The chamber itself seemed to lean in and listen. The consortium's eldest representatives, beings who had overseen the rise and fall of thousands of civilizations, found themselves experiencing something unprecedented. This wasn't a first contact scenario. This was a fundamental reimagining of what contact could mean. Zara Martinez, standing near Elena, represented something the aliens had never encountered. She wasn't a traditional leader. She was a node in a living, breathing network of human potential. Her presence carried the collective experiences of millions, not through hierarchical power, but through a fundamentally different approach to collective intelligence. The conversation that followed wasn't a negotiation. It was a becoming. Humanity presented not a set of demands or a plea for acceptance. They offered a framework of possibility. Each spoken word was simultaneously a diplomatic statement, a scientific hypothesis, an artistic expression, and an invitation to reimagine existence. The technological achievements they shared were almost incidental. A quantum communication protocol that transformed data into living narratives. An ecological management system that viewed planetary health as a complex, adaptive intelligence. A social framework that saw diversity not as a challenge to be managed, but as the primary source of collective strength. Most species saw first contact as a moment of potential conflict or careful diplomacy. Humans saw it as an opportunity for mutual transformation. The consortium's oldest representatives found their most fundamental assumptions dissolving. Technological superiority, irrelevant. Military might, a quaint misunderstanding of power. Cultural preservation, an outdated concept in the face of continuous, collaborative evolution. Dr. Marcus Chen demonstrated a computational model that wasn't just a technological system. It was a living philosophy, a way of understanding that saw information as a dynamic, collaborative process. The aliens watched as what appeared to be a simple demonstration revealed itself as a radical reimagining of intelligence itself. "We're not here to join your consortium," Elena explained. "We're here to expand the very concept of what a consortium could be." The diplomatic chamber transformed. No longer a fixed space of negotiation, it became a collaborative environment of continuous becoming. The walls shifted, reflecting complex emotional and intellectual landscapes that defied traditional dimensional understanding. Humanity wasn't asking to be accepted. They were offering a different way of existing. The Galactic Consortium's representatives experienced something beyond communication. It was a fundamental restructuring of their understanding of intelligence, of potential, of existence itself. Vorna, the historian who had first recognized the profound nature of human potential, watched with a sense of cosmic revelation. This wasn't a species joining a galactic community. This was a fundamental expansion of what a community could mean. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology, not their adaptability, not their collective intelligence. It was their capacity to see potential where others saw limitation, to transform conflict into conversation, to view every challenge as an invitation to grow. Ambassador Clinthor's final report would be simple and unprecedented. Humanity has not even begun to try. And that is precisely what makes them infinite. The universe would never be the same. And they were just getting started.